Hello there, everybody. This is Boniface with Unam Sanctam Catholicam. And it's been a while since we've done one of these unscripted videos. And so I thought it was about time. And what prompted me to want to do this video today was an article I came across yesterday on the National Catholic Reporter. Yes, I know I shouldn't be reading that, but I like to keep abreast of what everybody is saying on everybody's favorite subject, the disgraced artist Father Mario Rupnik. And the title of the article is Catholics Are Debating Whether to Remove Paintings by a Priest Accused of Abusing Women. But let's not confuse the artist and the art, writes an art historian. And as soon as I saw this headline, I kind of knew immediately where this piece was going to go. I right away assumed it was going to try to draw parallels between the case of Father Rupnik and Renaissance artists such as Raphael or of the Baroque Caravaggio artists who had scandalous personal lives, and probably try to say something like, well, we're not going to destroy Raphael's paintings because he led a licentious lifestyle. So why would we destroy Father Rupnik's art? I mean, just from sometimes you just know where these things are going to go as soon as you see the headline. And that's pretty much where this article goes. But I want to nevertheless go through it and respond to it because I see this argument being trotted out time and time again. And I think it's a weak argument. So let's go through. Oh gosh, there is that awful Year of Mercy logo. Remember that, where God the Father and Jesus were like cheek in cheek with their eye melting together? That is so bizarre. Okay. Marco Rupnik, a Catholic priest, was expelled from the Jesuit order because he'd allegedly abused women. He was later incardinated into the diocese in his native Slovenia. And then it talks about how his work is on display all over the world in Lourdes, Rome, Washington, D.C. How on earth did this disgusting art get such a wide exposure? I mean, honestly, the ancillary scandal here, the secondary scandal, is that Father Rupnik needed to be accused of sexual abuse before we started seriously talking about destroying his art. I mean, his art merits to be destroyed just because it's ugly and disgusting. I don't even know how to describe it. When I look at it, it just reminds me of ancient Sumerian statuary with the gigantic eyes. I'll throw a picture up here if you don't know what I'm talking about. But at any rate, I'm not sure how Father Rupnik got such a wide audience with this awful art. But at any rate, the author, Virginia Raguin, who is a art professor at Holy Cross College, she discusses here how some of these sites are planning to cover up or remove Rupnik's art, and how there's a big kerfluffle about it, and how even the Vatican's communication chief, Paolo Ruffini, is defending keeping Rupnik's art up on, not only keeping it up at sites managed by the Holy See, but keeping it up on his department's website, on the Vatican Communication website. So the author here says that discussions about removing Rupnik's art are missing the point. And then she goes on to talk about how great Rupnik's art is. And I'm not going to read all this, but she says that he basically bridges Eastern and Western traditions and goes on, talks about his resume basically and how distinguished he is. And it's funny because she thinks that the smushed, oh, I'm sorry, I misspoke. That wasn't God the Father and Christ. That was Christ and Adam, right? But she thinks that is just a brilliant, a brilliant concept. Christ and Adam's faces are pressed together, sharing a single eye to symbolize that Adam and Christ both share human nature. And then she says the motif of shared eyes appears in the art of the Renaissance. Okay, whatever. This art is degenerate. I'm not going to be gaslit into thinking this is other than degenerate. But then she goes into the question of personal morality and creative production. And we're going to read this in detail. So the author says, many revered works of art come from spiritually flawed creators. Raphael, whose frescoes, such as the School of Athens, reportedly had many mistresses. In fact, I think Raphael died in an orgy. I may be mistaken on that, but I seem to remember that he died while fornicating. I'm not sure. Uh, then she talks about the Italian painter Caravaggio, who killed a man in a brawl, resulting in receiving a death sentence for murder. Now, this is a little misleading. Caravaggio did receive a death sentence, but what she doesn't mention is that he fled to Naples to get away from the death sentence. The way she wrote it, it makes it sound like he was executed. She just says he got a death sentence, and then she moves on. Nonetheless, many of his paintings are deep expressions of faith. This is funny because, like I said, when I first saw the headline of this article, I thought to myself, she's going to talk about Raphael and Caravaggio, and those are exactly the ones she did. Okay, she says Caravaggio's Entombment of Christ, one of the greatest treasures of the Vatican, depicts the sorrow of Christ's followers. The artist's Madonna of Loreto, located in the Church of St. Agostino in Rome, has been admired for its ability to bring the divine into everyday life. And then she goes on to talk about how great Caravaggio's work is. She says, artists and all humans are inevitably flawed. Once finished, I believe an artist's work is independent of its creator. From my perspective, condemning art rather than debating how the Catholic Church might have allowed someone accused of abuse to avoid censure for so long is a diversion at best. All right, first thing, that last paragraph, condemning art rather than debating how the church may have allowed someone accused of abuse to avoid censure is a diversion at best. This is a kind of false dichotomy here, because we should do both. We should be looking into why Rupnik was allowed to go on as long as he did, but also condemn his art. It's not like it's not like we can't discuss the status of his art because we have to focus all our attention on just the investigation. So I think that's just a silly false dichotomy. She says also, artists and all humans are inevitably flawed. Once finished, I believe an artist's work is independent of its creator. I sympathize with this as a creative person, as an author who has, I've written multiple books, and I would feel it was tremendously unfair if, my books got canceled because I committed a sin that wasn't related to my creative work, right? If I don't know, I don't want to speculate on what sins I might commit, but let's say I commit some sin and people say, ew, I don't want to read his books anymore because he was a sinner in his private life. In that sense, yeah, I mean, all humans are flawed. And where do you draw the line? What types of sins qualify someone from being canceled? Um, how bad a sin do you have to commit? Now, that being said, I do support destroying Father Rupnik's art because I think Father Rupnik is a fundamentally different case. So I want to get that out there right now. I'm saying I sympathize with this position that, every artist is flawed and you can't just destroy their work because they're less than saintly, or you shouldn't. But I don't think that applies in Father Rupnik's case because Father Rupnik is no Caravaggio. To understand why Father Rupnik is no Caravaggio, we're going to look at another article here on Catholic Review, which is affiliated with Our Sunday Visitor. And this article by Federica Torn is called Alleged Victims of Father Mario Rupnik. His art cannot be separated from his abuse claims. And it starts out by talking about how, as recently as May 11th of this year, another mosaic of Father Rupnik was unveiled at the sanctuary of Our Lady of Aparecida in Brazil. Forgive me if I'm mispronouncing that, which I probably am. And how scandalized the victims of Father Rupnik are that his art is still being released and celebrated. And then it goes through some of the allegations. But what I want to stress here is the victims' emphasis on how Father Rupnik's art was intimately tied together with his sexual abuse. So One of Rupnik's earlier victims, Gloria Branciani, she says in this press conference, quote, Father Marco slowly and gently infiltrated my psychological and spiritual world by appealing to my uncertainties and frailties while using my relationship with God to push me to have sexual experiences with him. And then it says victims testified that the abuse included his fondness for three-way sex in the image of the Trinity. Blech! Oh gosh. Branciani goes on, quote, in Rupnik, the sexual dimension cannot be separated from the creative experience. In portraying me, she says, he explained that I represented the eternal feminine. His artistic inspiration stems precisely from his approach to sexuality. Branciani was one of Father Rupnik's models. She says Rupnik told her that sexuality is transformed and purified in the work of art, and that her expectations for a reflection on the relationship between art and liturgy were the door that allowed Rupnik to manipulate her. So she's saying essentially that his bizarre sexuality is reflected in his art, and that his art in turn is how he expresses his sexuality. So his kind of sexual deviance is one and the same with his creative energy. Then it goes on to talk about another victim, Sister Samuel, who is a French diocesan hermit who who was also abused by Father Rupnik. She said she was psychologically tortured by him, and she talks about ways that he did this. But then the interesting point is that she talks about how she was abused even at the construction sites of the mosaics. So it says the pressure continued even during work on the construction sites at the web of scaffoldings put up in order to complete the mosaics. Quote, he was sending me kisses while we were among the people. He tried to stay alone with me and caress my back and play with my bra even when we were on the scaffolding, Sister Samuel told OSV News. For Sister Samuela, it says the construction site was the place where Father Rupnik approached people sexually. In Italy and abroad, women who were involved in making the mosaics could be harassed. She says, today that we have the awareness, how can we pray in front of works made by his victims? Today's mosaics have their roots in the time when he used women as models and then a half hour later abused them. She goes on to point out that Father Rupnik, quote, learned how to make his drawings 40 years ago thanks to the sexual assaults on Gloria Branciani. Okay, so you see what the difference is here? Uh, Father Rupnik's abuse is integrally, intimately affiliated with his art. I mean, this sister says that he was sexually assaulting her on the scaffolding while the work was being created. And Gloria Bonciani talks about how um, his sexual abuse of women was part of his artistic process. So his sexual perversion and his artistic degeneration are one and the same deviance. They're both expressions of the same degeneracy. And this is what's different than Caravaggio or Raphael. Sure, Caravaggio, he's painting something beautiful like the entombment of Christ, and then later he goes to the bar and he gets drunk and he gets in a fight with someone. Okay. Raphael, he's painting the School of Athens fresco, and then he goes and has sex with prostitutes. Okay. The issue here isn't that the artists are sinners. We all have our own sins. The issue is that in the case of Caravaggio or Raphael, their sins aren't like bound up in this disgustingly integral way with the art they're creating. Their sins are kind of just something they're doing on the side in their private life, and their art isn't an expression of their sins, right? Their art isn't proceeding from that very deviance. They're not, as far as we know, it would be like, it's like this. Imagine Caravaggio killed someone in a brawl. Imagine that Caravaggio murdered one of his workers at the construction site and then used his blood to paint his painting, right? That would be different because his uh, his awful sin would be intimately tied up with the work itself, and we might think differently of it. I don't know. That's a You guys are going to savage that analogy in the comments, I know, so I'll just shut up. But the point is that there's an immense, profound connection between Rupnik's sexual perversion and his art that is very difficult to disentangle. And his victims say as much. They say that this art basically is his sexual perversion in artistic form. And for that reason, it merits destruction. On top of the reason that it's ugly and hideous, but it is right to take down this disgusting art. And I should say too, how how can we possibly believe that the church is serious about getting a handle on clerical sex abuse when it won't take this step, right? When it will not remove Father Rupnik's art, when not only is his art still present in the Vatican, but it's on the Vatican Communications Department website still, and the director of Vatican Communications is defending that. Like, they are really invested in this degenerate art, and they are going to go to absurd lengths to justify keeping it around, right? Um, because the ideology here trumps the the good of the victims. Honestly, the disgusting ideology that's behind the Rupnik art, the progressivist uh, synodality, et cetera, all that nonsense that's represented by this disgusting art is taking precedence over the closure that the victims deserve. And so, as long as that's going to be the case, how is anyone going to take the church's gestures in this regard seriously? Anyhow, that's my thoughts. What are your thoughts? Let me know in the comments what you think, and I'll see you in the next video. Take care.